Hi, welcome to my 5 Insider Factoids video. These are answers to questions that I've been asked by readers, so they're your questions. Today we're going to talk about Condor, Miranda Chase number 3. And yes, warning, this includes spoilers. Let's jump in. So, first I'd like to talk about the spy satellites. They're quite central to this story. The KH-11 Kennen, and there's rumors of a KH-12, are visual satellites. They're not radio frequency or cell phone frequency. They're visual satellites that sit up in orbit and look down. And whenever you see, oh, here's the cool action thing, it's one of these birds. And there are, I think, about a dozen of them up there that we have. It's basically a Hubble telescope. In fact, the history of this is pretty interesting. Is the When they're developing the Hubble telescope, they were originally developing it to be a bit bigger. And what happened was the uh, NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office, said, we've got one of these things spare. Do you want the frame? And so they basically gave them the Hubble telescope. And there are some people who think that if you go back to the history of the Hubble, when it first went up, it didn't focus right. And so they had to go up and put basically a corrective lens, a contact lens, on the telescope to fix the aberrations in the mirror. And there were all sorts of stories, none of which seemed to agree, about what was wrong with the curvature of the mirror and why it had been made wrong. One of the rumors was that they used the NRO's mirror, which was designed to look from orbit down. So it focused pretty well on a fairly short distance of a few hundred miles. When you flipped it and started looking out at things light years away, the focal curve was wrong. And I always liked this story. So it's like, maybe, just maybe, they screwed up the mirror because they used the one that was designed and built for the spy satellite. The resolution on these things is crazy. And it's one of the reasons that those images are so top secret, despite President Trump flashing them around on national television. Um, because I know in the 80s they were saying that you could see if a person had a postcard. You couldn't read the writing on it, but you could see if they had it. That's 40 years ago. So now what's public is 10 centimeter resolution, which means they can see anything bigger than, about that, and then a couple inches. Uh, I bet it's a lot higher than that. The Persona is the Russian version of that. So they have their own visual spy satellites up there. And rumor is that their resolution's about half a meter, so a couple feet. Uh, if it's smaller than a couple feet, they really can't see it. So they're not going to be reading license plates or anything. Not from orbit anyway. But there's this whole nest of spy satellites that orbit the Earth and are put up there by the different agencies that I wanted to play with. And so I brought them in to play on this with the team going to steal one of the Russians and these are multi-billion-dollar craft each, uh, to see what it can do. Now, in the beginning, I dealt with an aircraft capture. So there are some Russian military helicopters, and they're being delivered to the U.S. And uh, operative, a Russian operative, goes in to sabotage that delivery. Well, we do get these aircraft. Sometimes it's from defection. Uh, for example, there was a very famous one where somebody flew a jet that we were very afraid of. We didn't know much about. And they flew it from Eastern Russia into Japan. And we got to look at it and take it apart. And it was like, oh, it's really not that scary. It's very fast. and it can fly very high, but it was technologically so far behind us that it was almost comic. Um, some aircraft are captured by a regime change. So, for example, when the Shah got driven out of Iran and the uh, Muslim regime took over, we left behind a lot of equipment. We had sold F-14 Tomcats to the Shah to keep him in power, and when he fell out of power, the F-14 stayed on the ground. And the rumor is that even the the movie Top Gun Maverick picked up on this. The rumor is that some of them are still flyable. Also, during Desert Storm, we went in with a fleet of helicopters and tankers to try to rescue the Iranian hostages from that turnover. And the mission utterly failed out at a place called Desert One for a lot of reasons that I'll go into in some other video. But we left on the ground 6 or 7 helicopters, and most of them still worked. And a couple of those are still flying for Iran 35 years later. Um, so that can move things across. Also, sometimes it's friendly cooperation. For example, there's in one of the later Miranda books, I talk about the Ilyushin IL-76. It's a big transport plane. Well, one of the people that Russia has sold these planes to is India. And India, we are getting on better and better terms with. So India invited our Air Force specialists to come take a ride on their Ilyushin. And they got to go aboard, and they got copies of all the manuals and got to analyze everything and fly the plane. And so they got the knowledge of what it could do on friendly cooperation. So aircraft do move back and forth between the militaries. We left a lot of military on the ground in Vietnam, some of which is still in use, other of which is in their museums. So there is movement of the aircraft, like probably not as dramatic as I did for the opening scene, but that's the point of fiction. Okay, so this involves the Tier 1 Special Mission Units, and they report to Special Operations Command. And there are only 4 of them. And I talk about this in some other books over in the Night Stalker series. But from the Army, there's the Delta Force. From the Navy, there's DevGru, which people still call SEAL Team 6, even though that's long not been their name. The Air Force contributed the 24th STS, who are pretty close to invisible. They're combat air controllers. So let's say you're trying to take over an airport. They'll go in with the team. They're like a Delta team embedded in the team. They will take care of organizing all the air support and fire strikes and whatever's needed. Then as soon as you've captured the airport, you have to get a lot of stuff into that airport to hold it. You have to get personnel, food, equipment, supplies, machinery, other aircraft. So you need to get a lot of troops for the security perimeter. So they can literally, like an air traffic controller, run an entire airport with a couple of handheld radios and a card table. These guys are just amazing, but they're also warriors because they're out there with those insertion teams in dangerous situations. And then the activity, which has a ton of names, they literally rename it every year or so to try to keep it hidden, is a very small, very specialized intelligence group which exists only to service the other 3. Now, the 160th SOAR, the Night Stalkers that I write about in other series, are not considered a special mission unit. Some people say they should be, some say they shouldn't. They transport these guys in and out, but they also transport things like the 75th Rangers. And the 75th Rangers think they should be members, but they're the only ones who do. Nobody else. They provide a lot of the recruited people into Delta, but they're the next tier down. So the special mission units is something I was playing with in this book. Is okay, here they are, and here's the kinds of odd things they can do, along with the help of the activity. So what comes after the special mission units for other countries, or what's the parallel unit? Um, these are literally the assassin squads. So in Russia, it's Zaslon, and Israel, Mossad, the Mossad intelligence agency has the Kedon, who are the super shooters who like go in and kill the Iranian nuclear scientists and so on. And in the U.S., it's a branch of the CIA called the Special Operations Group, and that's the dirty work, the the snipers and assassination squad and so on. So those all exist out there, and imagine that kind of a group under Clarissa's command, and yeek. And the last question I get is about Miranda's evolution in this book. Where when I started the series, I've been exposed to autism research for a long time because my kid is an autism therapist. So I tried to understand it and learn it, just to have conversations with her and read the books she brought into the house. But for the first several books of Miranda, I was being really cautious because I didn't want to screw up in my research and what I'm saying about people. And finally, by about this point, my third book, I started getting fans who were depressingly familiar with autism. They had a kid on the spectrum, they'd just been diagnosed, and so on. And they kept saying, keep doing this, keep doing this. This is good. And so I actually went back and re-edited the first couple books, just here and there, to put in the word autism and spectrum and to sort of take ownership of that. And part of that is Miranda's evolution had moved to the point where I was understanding her better, and her acceptance of the team, and that the team has a role outside of sort of point and shoot of I need that done, I need that done. This is the first time the team really starts to take an initiative beyond the scope of Miranda. The other thing that's happening here in Miranda's evolution is relationships. It's the first time I decided to see what her relationships were like, because she was being pretty lonely. And these people had started to become friends, but she didn't know them that well. And I didn't want to get her in a romantic relationship with her team that would blow up the team. So getting her meeting John and going forward with John, I thought it was time. It was time for her to stretch herself out and get something that was about her rather than about planes. And so that's why that evolution happened at this point. And that's 5 questions answered. Please visit my website at mlbuchman.com. There are bonus scenes, recipes, um, maps, all kinds of good stuff. Thanks so much for watching.